Good morning and welcome to OISTA's third and final day of our 7th annual Capital Access Convening. We are so happy to have all of you join us today. I hope the last 2 days have been beneficial. You've learned a lot, you've got a lot of inspiration, met some new individuals, rekindled some relationships, and we hope to continue that measure today, our last day of our convening. I am so honored to present remarks from Administrator Guzman, a very dear partner to OISTA, SBA, the Small Business Administration. So with that, we will hear some remarks from Administrator Guzman.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great opportunity to be with you, even if it's virtually here from California, for OISTA's Capital Access Conference. All of the Native CDFIs here today are the frontline providers who help power small businesses and our economy. And your partnership is so valuable to us at the SBA. So it's my great honor to be with you. And I also have the distinct honor of serving in President Biden's cabinet as the 27th administrator of the SBA, an agency that is solely focused on delivering the American dream of small business ownership to all corners of our nation. And the Biden-Harris administration has prioritized a commitment to equity, ensuring that dream is open to all so that we can build a stronger and more inclusive economy that can compete globally. We want our entrepreneurs to dream big across the country, including in Indian country. And, you know, I grew up in a small business family. I started my own businesses. I've advised founders, and I've seen firsthand the positive impact that entrepreneurship can have in communities, and especially for historically underserved, underrepresented communities, including our tribal communities. Business ownership represents a critical path to building generational wealth. You know, and that entrepreneurial spirit is so strong in communities I visited across the country, including during my historic visit to Navajo Nation this past February. It was actually the first ever trip by an SBA administrator, and I was able to meet with so many entrepreneurs that really inspired me with their own personal journeys and the challenges that they've had to face, like Ashi Beauty and Marco RV Soul Jewelry and many others. And what Ashi and Marco and all the small businesses I visit with need is support in connecting to those core elements of entrepreneurial success. Capital, which I know you all are so great at, as well as market revenue, growth opportunities, and networks for technical assistance to help upskill and ensure that our small businesses can compete. You know, and that's what President Biden's vision is all about. It's about building our economy back better, and at the SBA providing an inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystem to ensure that no community is left behind. And President Biden knows that that's how we regain our global competitiveness. You know, we need all of our great ideas from everywhere and anywhere, as he likes to say, in order for us to continue to innovate and compete and grow our small businesses and our economy. And it is with this approach that President Biden has tackled our nation's greatest problem since taking office and ensuring that we invest in all of America. Thanks to the actions of the Biden-Harris administration and the President's American Rescue Plan, we have been successfully fighting COVID to reopen our schools and our businesses. We've seen a remarkable recovery with the small business boom as more Americans have started businesses than any year on record. Of course, the effects of COVID continue to disrupt our economy. Supply chain disruptions have persisted from COVID. Workforce shortages continue from COVID, as well as the Great Resignation. And the Putin war in Ukraine have created global food and energy crises. And the president has made it his top domestic priority to address these economic challenges, lowering costs for American families and tackling inflation. And small businesses are a critical part of that vision of building a better economy. It's our small businesses that will help us ensure we can build our economy back better with the historic $1.2 trillion in bipartisan infrastructure law investments in our roads and our bridges. It's going to strengthen commerce and lower supply chain costs. Infrastructure is chronically underfunded in Indian country, and it's critical for Native small businesses and economies to be able to thrive. So recently, actually last month, the White House released the Tribal Playbook with a roadmap that outlined a $13 billion set aside for tribal lands in the bipartisan infrastructure law, with nearly $4 billion in transportation, $2 billion in broadband, and many other investments that will go a long way to helping spur local economies as well. And that should mean contracts for our Native-owned businesses as well, which the SBA is positioned to help Native and tribal-owned entities access those contract opportunities. And it is also our small businesses that will help us make more in America, which is why we hope to see Congress move forward on the Manufacturing and Bipartisan Innovation Act to help us do just that. I have confidence in our small businesses who are going to use their trademark grit and determination to address these challenges head on. But I do think it's up to all of us together to make sure they can do just that. And that's where our work together in Indian country with tribal leaders and Native-focused support organizations like OWISTA and its members becomes so critical. Now more than ever, we need to be sure we can support all of our small businesses, including in Indian country, to navigate this COVID-disrupted marketplace. President Biden has made it clear that we need to work collaboratively with our tribal nations, which is why he re-engaged White House Tribal Nations Summit and why the SBA is implementing its tribal consultation policy. It's also why I've elevated the Office of Native American Affairs with Associate Administrator Jackson Brassi at helm, reporting directly to me. We need to invest in Indian country, and the President's 23 budget includes a 50% increase for the Office of Native American Affairs at the SBA to support more organizations serving Indian country. And thanks to President Biden's American Rescue Plan, the SBA has launched a historic new network of national and local organizations with 51 hubs and 448 spokes to build new connections to underserved communities and ensure entrepreneurs from all over the country can navigate federal programs. And I'm so proud that within this Community Navigator pilot program, we have now the largest SBA Native organization partnership ever, with 2 hubs and 35 of those spokes that I mentioned being Native focused. Our navigators are working hard to connect entrepreneurs with technical assistance all across the country, from Hawaii to Alaska to South Dakota to Maine. Typically in a year, SBA funds 4 to 7 Native nonprofits to do training and technical assistance. But with this Community Navigator program, we have 37 Native-focused partners within that program alone. And OWISTA has been a true leader of this program. I'm so thankful for their leadership, their experience that they've brought to helm as the largest Native CDFI intermediary, supporting 26 of those spokes that I've mentioned. And I know OWISTA and its 26 spokes have big plans for the next 2 years as a pilot program, counseling businesses, providing loans, which will lead to jobs in Native American communities. And OWISTA spokes have already started sharing stories with us with incredible impact, which I know is powerful to hear. There's a Chippewa woman-owned contractor who received technical assistance that she needed to get emergency contract financing to complete 3 large projects she may not have been able to complete. And with better support, she's now positioning herself for accessing a longer-term working capital products from the SBA through OWISTA partners. And others have received assistance to finance equipment purchases, to pursue revenue growth, and expand their operations. This is the type of work that we see our spokes already doing on the ground, working with small businesses to ensure that they can connect to federal programs to advance their businesses. And those are the stories that are going to mean real impact on lives and communities across Indian country. As we continue to advance SBA investments in equity across the board, we're also focusing on delivering our products specifically for Native entrepreneurs. And I know one area of focus that we share in common is that capital is key. And at the SBA, of course, we're focused on making sure that small dollar loans that our smallest businesses and our emerging startups need are available and accessible to all, including those across our tribal lands. And CDFIs are out there already meeting that need for communities that have been left behind too much in the past. And of course, the Biden-Harris administration has prioritized those businesses, smallest of the small, and women and people of color who are starting businesses at the highest rates, so we can ensure that they access relief. It shows in our results in 2021. And during my tenure as head of the SBA, I've challenged my team to be entrepreneurial and meet our customers where they are, so we can focus on transforming our products and services to improve access to capital and streamline our customer experience and ensure that Native entrepreneurs have access to the suite of SBA lending products for working capital or equipment purchases or building acquisitions. And in 2021, SBA proudly delivered $285 million in our core lending programs to our Native communities. But we can do more. And we've made several announcements recently, and we'll continue to work hard to continue to advance those numbers. Recently, with Vice President Harris, we announced significant improvements and an expansion of our Community Advantage pilot loan program, which gives CDFIs access to our 7A working capital loans up to $350,000. We have simplified eligibility and underwriting and are focused on making the program more user-friendly for our mission-based lenders. Hopefully, many of you have participated in one of our training sessions. I know that Jackson Brassi has organized some targeted sessions just for the Native CDFI community, and we encourage you to apply to become a Community Advantage lender today. We want to partner with you to expand our distribution network in Indian country. We want you to be SBA ready as well, so that you can be part of the further transformations we intend to make this year to simplify our SBA lending. It's why we are focused on regulatory reform and investing in technology, so that we can make sure we connect more borrowers to an expanded network of lenders across the country. And most importantly, we know that tribal land-based entrepreneurs face unique barriers to capital, which is why I'm so proud that at the recent RES Conference 2022 in Las Vegas, I announced that SBA's has launched a new tribal lending initiative. And I'm hoping many of you have heard about it or participated, but I've basically tasked my team in the Office of Capital Access to explore all options to reduce those barriers to SBA lending for Native CDFIs and Native business owners. And we're leveraging Jackson Brassi's unique experience, formerly heading up the Native CDFI network, to help lead this initiative with my Capital Access team and ensure that we collaborate with you all in listening sessions to uncover the challenges and define solutions, so that we can expand and broaden our accessibility to Native entrepreneurs across the country. I know that we've held several listening sessions to date, and we welcome your continued insights, which have been extremely helpful in helping us develop our next steps. So stay tuned. I'm very excited about this initiative, and it's part of our commitment to making sure that we can better support entrepreneurs with capital in particular that we know they need in order to grow and leverage those revenue growth opportunities. You know, I believe these highlights really emphasize the Biden-Harris administration's commitment to ensuring that we can build strong, stable growth in our economy and ensure that entrepreneurial opportunities are open to all, and that we have the resources available meeting businesses where they are, including on tribal lands, so that they can be successful. You know, building equity for us in the Biden-Harris administration is not just about doing the right thing. We know that it's also good for business, it's good for our economy, and it's good for all of us. And I am really inspired by all the work that OWISTA and its partners have done in collaboration with the SBA. Your leadership in communities to advance prosperity for Native entrepreneurs is what inspires us to continue to advance our programs. As we work in these coming months to build an economy that works for everyone, I know that your work will help us ensure that anyone with a good idea can successfully achieve their dreams of starting and growing and building a resilient business. So I look forward to working with you to making sure that reality can happen and building a stronger SBA in the process to serve all of our entrepreneurs. Thank you so much for all the work that you do, and continue the great work.
Those were absolutely wonderful remarks from Administrator Guzman. OISTA is so proud and honored to be a Navigator Hub under a new grant pilot initiative in which she was speaking of. And actually, this is a wonderful conduit as we're celebrating Native entrepreneurs, as we're celebrating the ingenuity and the business creation that we're seeing all over Indian country, Alaska, and Hawaii in regards to propelling entrepreneurship within our respective tribal communities. So the next portion of our agenda is actually pretty exciting. This is the first time that OISTA is able to provide small business awards to Native entrepreneurs. So through generous sponsorships, OISTA is thrilled to present our first ever Native Small Business Awards. Today, we will be recognizing 2 Native-owned businesses who will receive a $20,000 unrestricted grant. The 2 awards celebrate the entrepreneurial spirit and perseverance of local business owners and their outstanding business ingenuity, contributions to cultural preservation, and community impact. It is through the successes and prosperity of Native small businesses that Native nations can realize self-determination. Eligibility requirements for these awards were pretty simple. Businesses had to be operating for at least a 2-year minimum. Businesses should be owned and or at least 50% of their employees Native American, Alaska Native, and or Native Hawaiian. And nominations were limited to 1 organization. So we had put a call out to our Native CDFI industry to please nominate one of your local entrepreneurs for these awards. So I am so very pleased today to present our 2 award winners. First, we have the Tiny Tots Learning Center, LLC, run by Bobby and Dante Penny, and they were nominated by the Nimipu Loan Fund. The Tiny Tots Learning Center has capitalized on every COVID-19 pandemic obstacle possible to create new opportunities for staff, students, and they have expanded to open a 3rd facility, Tiny Tots facility, within the Nimipu Reservation. Nimipu Fund provided the initial seed funding with a small business loan in 2016 to start in-home daycare, and since then, Tiny Tots has expanded across the Nez Perce Reservation. So we're very happy now to announce and have remarks from our first winner of the OISTA Native Small Business Award, Tiny Tots LLC.
My name is Bobby Penny. I am the owner and founder of Tiny Tots Learning Center, along with my husband, Santee Penny. He's not here today, but he is the one who pretty much the catalyst for this business. We saw a need in our communities, particularly in Lapwai, and decided to start our business, Tiny Tots, which is an early child care learning center. Well, first of all, it's an honor to be even considered for something like this. Like I said, we started this business back in 2014, and it was at a time where I feel like, there wasn't really a lot of awareness, I think, of Native issues. And yet I feel like so then we kind of tiptoed into, getting this business going. But then as we've gone over the years, it's become more of a snowball effect where we've been able to grow into and learn more about our people, more about the community, more about the language, more about the needs of not only our community locally, but as a tribe and as a nation, and how to promote, indigenous ways of thinking and learning. We went through the Native Entrepreneurship Workshop, and of course, being a newbie, I was really insecure and unsure of what we were doing, and I think that our vision, our ideas just kind of evolved through the years, and CDFI has definitely played a huge role in supporting our goals. Like, yeah, without them, we wouldn't have probably been able to get started. We started out with just a small loan. We paid that off. We opened a second facility. We took out a second loan from Nimipu Fund, and we paid that off. And so far, we've been pretty much debt free. In 2020, I was able to finish my teaching degree in curriculum and instruction, and for part of my program was to develop a year-long curriculum, and of course it was a cultural curriculum. I did Native studies for the state of Idaho, and in particular we've been adding lessons to it as we go and kind of adapting it to the younger age children. But we really feel like this cultural outdoor classroom that we want to create, which started in 2020, we started developing ideas. I think it was 2020. Yeah, 2020. We started coming up with ideas of what we wanted to see our kids learn. We wanted to provide appropriate challenges for kids to stimulate their bodies, their minds, to help them grow. We also want to increase their language ability, speaking ability. We want to see them using the language in multiple environments. So we wanted to create this classroom where we could have a story time and have language there, and have do camas root digging up in mussel shell, and then bring it back to our camas pit and bake camas together. But also I wanted to, of course we do a classroom part of that too, to kind of build the kids' knowledge of what significance the camas played in the survival of Indigenous people for many thousands of years. So I think that this award will help us be able to continue that work, continue growing, continue with the vision that my husband and I started, and we were able to purchase an acre piece of land that we can develop and we can work with as far as using this funds. I also would like to hire a full-time language teacher, cultural teacher. That's been my goal for the past couple of years, is trying to find the individual who's ready to take that plunge. I firmly believe that it's about empowering the membership and the tribal members in particular, and I just really feel like it's my job to instill confidence not only in the children that we teach, but also our teachers and our community members. I want people to realize that they have it within them to become, to learn the language, to learn the stories. It's just having to be open to the idea that we all have to start somewhere, and I think that that's where Tiny Tots is basically laying that foundation of, we got to start somewhere, and we're gonna, slowly get there, but we'll get there regardless. So thank you for this nomination. Thank you for this award. We are honored, and we're looking forward to continuing the work that we're doing.
Oh, that was so wonderful and inspiring. We are so excited to be able to have the opportunity to present these awards. Our second award is nominated by the Wisconsin Native Loan Fund, and we have Darlene Denny of Turtle Mountain Gifts, who won the Small Business Award. Turtle Mountain Gifts exemplifies cultural preservation, business ingenuity, and community impact, especially in persevering through the COVID-19 pandemic. One way it exemplifies cultural preservation is by collaborating with the Oneida Basket Guild, to promote craftsmanship and public sale of handmade Oneida baskets. The gift shop also functions as a business incubator wherein local artists and craftspeople can gather in a cost-effective manner to showcase and sell their handmade items. Over 35 Native and ethnic-inspired artists, crafts, people who sell jewelry, art, beads, fine stones, clothing, are able to participate in this market and sell their goods. So we are so very happy to hear a message from Darlene Denny the owner of Turtle Mountain Gifts.
Sagoli. My name is Darlene Denny. I'm an Oneida tribal member, and I'm the owner of Turtle Island Gifts and Inward Bound. Inward Bound is a healing space as well as an art gallery, and I'm actually sitting here in front of the beautiful Oneida Basket Guild display. I wanted to take this opportunity to thank both WINLF and OISTA for this amazing recognition, as well as the generous award that comes with it. We actually plan on using that money to help pay down some debt that we have accumulated over the last 2 years during COVID, as well as reinvest in inventory of the native handmade goods that we're specializing in here. That reinvesting in community is actually how we started. 8 years ago, before we had a brick and mortar store, due to life circumstances, I was starting over and had decided I was going to be a vendor out on the Powwow Trail. Well, I realized quickly that living in Wisconsin, that is limited potential for income because of our weather, and so it's only during the summer months. So that's where the inspiration came to open Turtle Island Gifts as a actual brick and mortar store. But I didn't want it to be about me. I wanted it to be about our community. And there were a lot of talented Native artists and powwow vendors that also needed a space, a retail space. And so I invited the community in, and to be honest with you, it's been an amazing success. It's been an amazing journey. We come together where we each bring our strengths to the table. So the vendors, like I said, there's over 40 of them, bring their creativity in all forms, and I bring my background in marketing so that I can help them with the merchandising, the promotions, and obviously the selling. So we each bring something, but together we create something bigger than either of us could do by ourselves. It's a beautiful no-risk business incubator kind of model, whereby the vendors, for just very little money, very little time, can begin a business and manage their inventories, create some extra income, and learn the marketing portions by working with me. So that is an amazing part that we definitely have to thank WINLIF and other organizations for our success. So the next part of the story comes in 2020 when I decided to rent the space I'm sitting in currently to open Inward Bound. As I said, it's a healing space, but also an art gallery. And the idea was what we were doing over at Turtle Island Gifts, I wanted to replicate over here, but for service providers. So that is more retail, and this would be more service oriented. So we have a lot of beautiful Native healers in our community who have knowledge and skills that address wellness and health. And that's exactly what we thought this community could use. Regretfully, we opened it 2 weeks before COVID occurred, so that was early March. And so we had to close down our space and obviously the store for several months. There was a loss of revenue at Turtle Island Gifts, and then over here, it was actually a severe setback because the business model that we created was a business model based on coming together face to face, doing classes and doing healing together. But of course, early 2020, the word of the day was social distancing, right? So we really haven't been able to do our projected, our hopeful, our dream for this space until most recently. So 2 years later, here we are, and we are beginning to build this side of the business. We now are offering on a weekly basis yoga classes, sound healing, group meditation, massage, Reiki, spiritual mentoring, and in the fall, we'll be offering every week pathways classes, which are just different topics at a low price for people to come in and learn whatever it is that is being offered. So although we are here, we're moving forward, this is what I'm saying is that we wouldn't be here though without the support and the guidance of WINLF. They really were here from the beginning of our journey. They helped me purchase a van. which is needed in order to transfer merchandise to events and do that kind of work. They also helped me with a debt consolidation loan, which was really needed so that I could get back on my feet and create some financial stability, and again, to be able to invest in new product lines. So I believe that our success is the success of the CDFIs. Together, we build stronger, more sovereign, more self-sustaining Native communities. So once again, I close with a heartfelt thank you for this amazing opportunity, and I assure you it will be used well.
Oh, that was so inspirational. I love all of their services. I think I want to go live at Turtle Island Gifts. Again, a big congratulations to Tiny Tots and to Turtle Island Gifts. We are so happy to be able to support initiatives, support this grant program, and again, a big thank you to our sponsors. This would not have been possible without you to highlight and have an opportunity to provide a little bit of equity to both of these astounding businesses. So with that, again, Chimagwich. As we move on to the next portion of our agenda, I would like to bring up Crystal Langholt, OWISTA's Chief Operating Officer, who will intro our next panel and give a little bit of context to the rest of the day. Again, thank you so much for joining OWISTA's third and final day of our 7th annual Capital Access convening. We look forward to seeing you throughout the day in our sessions, and please do join our closing plenary today. We have a wonderful last session and a very, very special guest speaker that we're really looking forward to highlight to you. So, Chimagwich, Gwingay, Minugiji Ganongum. It's a very good day today, and we look forward to seeing more of you. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, that was beautiful. And as we got to listen to today, we saw the power of inclusive economy with the comments that were given earlier. We saw the power of that, of course, in the wonderful awards that we were able to see from our Native small businesses. And so one of the ways we build an inclusive economy is through inclusive underwriting. And so I'm super excited to follow up that conversation this morning with this conversation, which is one about assessing risk. And of course, we as Native CDFIs, we have to underwrite differently than the rest of the traditional mainstream financial services, right? We are thinking about including our communities. We're creating culturally tailored, culturally sensitive lending products that think of the 5 C's in a really intentional way around our community. And so we are going to take some time. We have been going through a wonderful and exciting research project over the last year with our partner Sweetgrass Consulting and 13 Native CDFI partners as we think about assessing risk as an industry, learning from each other and learning what does risk really mean and how do we evaluate that fairly, what really predicts whether a loan will go bad. And so with that, I'm going to invite our partners, Andrea Akers, to join our conversation. Oh, I used your maiden name. That's so funny. That's what happens when you've been friends for that long. And our great friend Kristen Stambuck from Four Directions to join me here as we talk about that research and the great work that we've been doing and the wonderful work of our partners around this exciting topic. So first and foremost, when we think about underwriting, we think of capital with a justice lens, right? We've seen the 5 C's of credit, and one of the things that, of course, we know that happens in the traditional financial mainstream, right, that has happened historically, as many of the underwriting criteria, collateral, equity, those require a certain amount of resources, right? And then many of our entrepreneurs, our homeowners that are coming into those spaces might not have all of those resources that are required to access mainstream financial services. That's why Native CDFIs exist. And so one of the things we really wanted to understand was what was really predicting risk in our risk models as we underwrite, right? We usually use several different underwriting criteria, and then we provide loan ratings based on them. They're usually adapted. Some cases they're adapted from those traditional 5 C's of credit: collateral, capital, character. But then in other cases, right, we've also seen examples of Native CDFIs that have completely thrown those out and come up with their own criteria. So it's very difficult in some ways to study those because there's a great diversity of sort of how we underwrite and how we think through how we are going through risk modeling. But there are so many similarities too, right? We're all really trying to come up with those adaptive, responsive models to our communities. And so we really wanted to try to tell that story, both to our partners in the traditional financial mainstream, but also to ourselves as we sort of what really predicts whether our loans are going to go bad and how can that make us better, more inclusive underwriters. And so we were really led to this by our great partner Forbands, who did this work already in a previous year or two ago. They started to have those conversations internally, and they inspired us at OISTA, and they inspired the rest of the field to think through that together. So with that, I would like, Kristen's going to talk a little bit around that original study and how it sort of fed the work that we're doing here and how it informed the rest of the study.
Thank you, Crystal. Yeah, so Forbands in 2017, so about 5 years ago, we were lucky enough or able to become part of the Wells Fargo Diverse Community Capital Group, and which basically let us be included in this group. We got to see what all these other CDFIs were doing, not just Native CDFIs, but regular CDFIs are doing across the nation. And MoFi was a part of that group out of Montana, and they had presented this regression analysis on, they went and did a deep dive on how their underwriting ultimately affected the delinquency or performance, good, bad, of their loans. And we just thought that was a really great idea because Forbands has been around had been around for 17 years, and we had our underwriting criteria, how we rate out loans, how our risk analysis is on each individual borrower, and we just had never looked back to say, really, what we're underwriting for, is that really what our borrower, how they end up performing. So we were able to go back and work with Andrea and give her a bunch of data on every loan it wasn't every loan we'd ever done, but a good chunk of data to see really what drove, like, what loans were successful for Forbands or not. And for the most part, I mean, we were pretty close, our measures for collateral and equity and, and important things that we thought were important were still important in determining delinquency. But there was a few others that, that weren't exactly indicators of what a bad loan would be. So we were able to go through and kind of tweak how we were underwriting and rating out our loans based off of that data. How much farther do you want me to go into that, Crystal?
I think that's great. I think that's wonderful. Thank you, Kristen.
Yep.
And then our Andrea is going to move us forward and just tell you a little bit about the study, how we took that original vision that Kristen and the Forbands crew had around making sure that their underwriting criteria really fit and were predictive of risk and their community, and how we tried to scale that across all of our partners to provide useful data for you all as you think about underwriting in your communities.
Great, thank you, Crystal. So just a little bit of background on the study that we did to try to bring this to the larger industry, right? So we found some really interesting things with Forbands and said, does this apply across all Native CDFIs? And so some of the methods that we worked on around this group, as with everything OWISTA, this was a participatory process, right? So we had an advisory group who was part of the process, as well as, you can see here the listing of CDFIs who actually provided data as well. But this really started first with a little bit of research about what typically Native CDFIs are doing around risk analysis, and having conversations broken out by loan product generally, right? So we had conversations with business lenders, with home lenders, and with consumer lenders, about what risk analysis really looks like around these types of loans. And so that kind of led up the original study here, is to say, what are some of the major themes? What are the things that you all are most interested about? What are the questions that you have about how risk analysis is really working in your communities? And then we started to design the research based on those conversations. At that point, really the research design looked like helping figure out what metrics we wanted to collect from all the participating Native CDFIs across the board. And so we developed workbooks for the participating CDFIs who were giving us raw data, so individual data about every single loan that they were providing. So we sort of developed that based on the conversations that we had and driven by the risk analysis and the way that we do underwriting based on loan product. And so that was our sort of push there, is to kind of help support folks on what data we're looking for. And then we gave everyone, 6 months, almost 9 months really in the end, to provide us with that data. So that really meant pulling into loan records, both electronically and on paper. And all of this was during the time of COVID as well, right? So folks are kind of having to negotiate who's going to be in the office to look up data for folks that we're trying to get information on. So we tried to sort of support people and give them some time, had individual calls with all the participating CDFIs to make sure that that was going smoothly for them. And then after that point, we didn't actually get to the same point as MoFi in terms of a full-on regression analysis. But what we ended up doing around the analysis is looked at each individual metric and compared the delinquent loan clients to those who were not delinquent. So we pulled everyone's data together based on loan product first, and then did the analysis comparing delinquent to not delinquent loans based on each metric. And the idea there was to say, are these two samples, delinquent and not, are they statistically different based on this metric? And this is really kind of an introduction study into understanding what risk analysis looks like. We don't know necessarily how metrics play with each other. We know how each individual metric works sort of siloed potentially, and gives us an idea of where we would want to dig deeper. But it does give us some pretty interesting initial results. Of course, with every research study, there's some limitations. There's limitations with this study as well. We do have a fairly small sample size across the board, especially because of the low delinquency rates for Native CDFIs across the board, right? So we needed a large enough sample of delinquent loans to compare to the not delinquent. And that ended up being more difficult than not necessarily than we had anticipated, but it meant that folks had to go back further in time to get us a large enough sample of delinquent loans to compare to not delinquent.
So Andrea, I just want to pause there and just reflect what you just said, because I think it's amazing. So one of the main issues we had with this study was that you all are such good underwriters that we didn't have enough delinquent loans to have a representative sample size. So we had to work really hard to find delinquent loans because you guys are that amazing. So I just wanted to hit that up again, because that is a point worth just repeating and screaming to the wind.
For sure. Yeah. So with that, of course, though, we had some other, sort of gaps in data, right? Like not everyone was collecting every single metric that we were asking for, which we knew was going to be the case. And we wanted to make sure we tried to kind of meet everyone where they were at with data. But that does limit some of the metrics, right? Some metrics we have a lot of data for, like credit score, for example, is a really well collected metric. Some other metrics, though, folks, we spend a lot of time working with clients one-on-one, but not everyone tracks those hours, for example. And there's several metrics that are like that, right? That we have, maybe one or two of the participating CDFIs in the sample had data on that. Versus others who didn't. So just to say, there are some grains of salt with what we're looking at here, and it's definitely sort of a preliminary understanding of what risk analysis looks like for Native CDFIs. All right, so we will now move to digging into some of this data. And of course, if anyone has questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat and they'll be communicated to us as well in this event platform, just so everyone knows if you want to ask us things, feel free. But we'll move on here and we're going to talk about each one of the loan types here independently to kind of look at the overall picture of some of the data that we found as we did this analysis. So the first one to share here is business lending. So you'll see here kind of two columns of bulleted information and then a graphic over there to the right. The graphic is showing in bar chart here an idea of what the differences were on the significant metrics that you see on the far left-hand column. But then in the middle there, you will see what we're calling not significant. So these are data points that we collected information on, but that there was not a difference between our delinquent sample and our not delinquent sample. And we just wanted to show these on the same slide together because they both inform different sort of things. And the significant metrics you can see there are just in alphabetical order. There's no sort of level of importance or level of significance necessarily associated with these. But these are all the metrics that we saw that did predict to some degree whether a loan would be delinquent or not. And then the bar chart, like I mentioned, shows the difference between these delinquent and not delinquent loans. So for example, if you look at cash flow over there, it was a significant metric. And the difference in cash flow is that we're looking about $10,000 worth in actual cash flow for delinquent loans compared to not delinquent loans had about a $24,000 difference, or not difference, but amount in cash flow. So that's sort of how this works. And you can kind of go down the board. One of the ones, sort of down here that's interesting that most folks look at with risk analysis being credit score, that we see an average credit score for delinquent loans of 601 and an average for not delinquent of 662. And so you can see the little bit of the difference of the averages of delinquent and not delinquent here. One of the things to point out, especially about this business lending, and we also had conversations, right? So after we did all of this analysis, we brought the data back to the folks who participated and gave data and heard from them about some of their interpretations. And one of the ones that I want to call out for business lending specifically is lending hours. You will see three things in here that I'd like to describe a little bit in terms of metrics: lending hours, coaching hours, and training hours. So those three number of hours have a little bit of different definitions to them. So lending hours, we like to consider really it's the work that the loan officer is doing in underwriting. There's might be a little bit of back and forth with the client at that point of, sort of getting follow-up on documents or things of that nature. But really it is the time typically that's spent with the loan officer doing the underwriting activities, versus coaching hours, which you'll see more heavily in the home lending slide next. That coaching hours is that time that you spend one-on-one with a client, walking them through, educating them, explaining their credit report to them in a business world, helping them with business planning, things of that nature. A little bit more of that sort of educational component happening with the coaching hours. And then finally, training hours is the time that the client has spent in a classroom setting receiving education and training. So that's just something that's come up pretty regularly as we explain this data, that those three hour amounts and what we're sort of defining them as. I'll also talk about very quickly here before I get into a little bit of depth with the business lending is character score and client engagement. You'll see those across the board as well. When we talk about character score, it is a score that's assigned by the loan officer about this client, and it is a little bit of a subjective score, right? It's kind of looking at this character and giving your sort of gut reaction, right? Is this person going to be a good loan repayer, a good loan client or not? And there is some ideas about backing that up. It's their role in their community, it's their level of supports, it's their history with you as a client. Things like that kind of play into character score. We'll talk more about that when we talk about sort of the findings in aggregate. And then the client engagement score feels somewhat similar to that character score, but it's really more about how engaged that client was throughout the application process, right? Were they responding to emails? Were they calling you? Were they providing their documents to you in a reasonable amount of time? Were they generally engaged with you throughout the process? So I'd like to just give a little bit of definition on those before I delve in here. The one I want to call out specifically about business lending that came up in our conversations was lending hours. You can see here that the more lending hours that was provided to a business loan client, the more likely they were to be delinquent. So you can see on average 7.3 hours provided to delinquent loan clients versus 3.5 hours provided to not delinquent. And so that's something that came up in these conversations. And Kristen actually had a pretty good insight the other day about this, saying that, maybe it's taking us more time to underwrite a loan that we maybe are new at. This might be a new industry, or maybe it's a different loan size or loan type that we're not as familiar with. And so the underwriting is taking us longer. And because we're unfamiliar, that leads to potentially some more delinquency there. We were also considering that lending hours, or what we were hearing from folks with lending hours, is that the more time it takes to get a person through the process, maybe it's we're having to go back and forth with the client a ton and adjust their financials and things like that to make the loan work, that it ends up being delinquent or more likely to be delinquent. So there's just some of the interpretations, but really part of what we'd love to hear from you all, either during the session today or afterwards, is your interpretations of what you're seeing here. We've heard it from a handful of folks who participated and provided their data, but really the power of this is understanding from you all your sort of interpretations and feelings on this. Conversely, just to point out here too, at those coaching hours, you'll see lending hours towards the bottom and coaching hours about partway down. That coaching hours really does help, right? Like that one-on-one work with a loan client really does increase their level of ability to repay their loan. And so that relationship building is a really core component. And we will talk about that, and you'll see it as a theme as we continue on here. Kristen or Crystal, any comments you'd like to make on the business side before we move to home?
I think it's important. I just want to highlight that what are some of the not significant things that came up here? Specifically, just one of the things that we were a little bit surprised at was that the equity invested by the owner was not necessarily predictive of whether a loan went delinquent or not. And I know, for example, as we think of the mini guarantee programs that are out there that require certain amounts of equity, that has some policy implications for us as an industry, as we think of what's not significant here, and how we can potentially tell that story so that we can make sure that loan guarantees and other kinds of programs that sort of support and our underwriting practices really fit sort of the predictive model of what's actually happening with risk in our community. So I just wanted to also highlight some of the not significant things too.
Great, thanks. Kristen?
Nope, I also, the equity piece, Crystal, you just speak to, that's just the biggest barrier that I feel like we see is the equity, and it really does not in the end make a difference on how the loan's going to perform. I feel like from what we've seen. So it really just, if we can get some policy change on some of those higher up deals with that equity requirement, it's just so important. More people would be getting loans, so if we could.
For sure. Awesome. Thank you both. And so we'll do a similar exploration here, but looking at home loans instead. One of the caveats with the home loans is that we did have a mix of second and first mortgages in this sample. And so when you're seeing the data here, it is a combination of the two. We did do some further analysis comparing and pulling out those two loan products separately. But for the purposes of this presentation, I just like to caveat that. And with business loans, obviously, we've got a sort of runs the gamut of different sort of loan types under there, and same thing with consumer. But first and second mortgages are fairly significantly different. So I just wanted to mention that. So we can see here that we have a few less significant metrics in comparison to business, and really kind of a similar amount of not significant metrics. But you'll see here that same theme that we were seeing to some degree with the business folks as well that character score, client engagement, coaching hours, and credit score, and lending hours actually all come back here as significant, and similarly with business as well. You'll see here that shift though in the lending hours, right? So now it's the more lending hours, the more likely they are to repay. And so it's in contradiction really to business lending. So there's a sort of a different interpretation happening with that process here, and there is a lot more to do, and well, maybe not a lot more to do, but the underwriting is fairly different, right, in business versus home lending. And that was one of the interpretations that we heard from folks, that there's maybe some more land issues in working with BIA, different entities around home lending that you don't always have to deal with around business, and so some of that falls into underwriting and lending hours and can help sort of explain some of that interpretation. So credit score across the board, right, has shown to be significant. And the other sort of financial indicator on the home side is debt to income, but only on the back side, right? So you have to include all of that person's debt for the debt to income to be significant for predicting delinquency or not. And you'll see there even that the percentage gap is not crazy there, right? So we're looking at 37.1% debt to income ratio for delinquent loans on average versus a 43.7% for not delinquent loans. So that gap's not intense right there. So just to kind of be aware in that, and again, it's back DTI for that. But we've got similar levels here around just really building a relationship with clients, which is not a surprise, right? It's something that Native CDFIs excel in, and really is the bread and butter of how this work happens. Some of the things though that did come back is a little bit more surprising, and as Crystal kind of highlighted on the previous slide with not significant, here we have not significant things that folks really heavily rely on in underwriting for home lending. Things like dollar amount in savings and loan to value ratio, household income, and front debt to income ratios as well, were all things that were not as significant for home lending. So just, kind of an interesting piece that really is about relationship building rather than sort of the money brought to the table to some degree around home lending. Any other comments from Crystal and Kristen here?
No, I think you covered it wonderfully. And yeah, just what you were talking about with the lending hours, with the home lending process, with BIA and all of the sort of slow ups in that process, it's not surprising that you have to spend a lot of time working with clients to get them through that from a process standpoint. So I think you covered it great. We do have some good questions that have popped up in the chat. If you want to tackle some of those, I think that'd be great.
Yes, good point. Kristen, go ahead though before I start into those.
Yep, I don't really have anything else to add for the home lending. Nope.
Perfect. All right. So some of the questions that have come through the chat here is one of them is asking about if we were able to assess if there was a correlation between lending hours and climate engagement and character score. And unfortunately, it's not something we were able to do, is kind of look at comparing, grouping metrics together to understand how much lending hours does work together or against, say, client engagement and character score. Is definitely something that we're really interested in sort of digging into this data in the future and doing some more work with it. Like I said, this is really kind of a first dive and kind of preliminary into it, but things like that are really helpful to hear from folks about things that would be interesting to know. And there's just so many different things that we could go into with it that we're definitely excited about in the future.
And I would also just add, one of the things that we're presenting to this, like one of the other questions that came up was, is a report available regarding the study? And I just wanted to share that we are working on the report as we speak. So this is like a interactive conversation about what would you find interesting for us to talk about and share, and what kind of analysis could we do on this with this data that could be useful for us to put into the report. So that's super helpful. And I will also just share that we're excited that we're going to be doing our report report here at OWISTA. It'll be co-written by Forban, Sweetgrass, and OWISTA. But we are also, we have shared this data with, of course, with permission from our partners, with the Center for Indian Country Development, with some absolutely brilliant economists that have been working with Native communities for a long time. And they are going to be doing like the really in-depth like correlation, regression, like the big stats pages that we're going to be able to see on a report that they're working on related to it too. So it's going to be really exciting. So if there are correlations or very specific kinds of things like that, we can pass that information and desire to see that to our partners at the Center for Indian Country Development, and they can pull some of that out in their own report or in their own analysis for us too. So I just wanted to provide that context because you are interactively shaping what our report looks like right now.
Mm-hmm. Yes, very good points, Crystal. Thank you. A couple of the other questions here that aren't sort of answered by there is a report forthcoming. There's one question here about looking at numbers of years of experience and market conditions and lending to businesses within the lender's purview. We did hear a good deal of conversation about that during our sessions with the lenders, especially around market conditions, right? To say, a lot of it really does depend on, say, the industry that you're working in and external factors that may influence the market. And that's not something that we have data on necessarily for this study specifically, but is something that definitely was brought up as conversation points that obviously, there are some external factors, right, that impact whether or not a loan goes delinquent or not. And so that's something definitely that we looked into, considered, not actually got data on, but something that's very helpful to hear from you all. There's another piece here about tribal land and fee simple land, especially with home lending, right? And so that's something that actually has come up with Forban's in an additional study looking at what tribal land versus fee simple looks like. So we're doing a little bit of a different dive with them, and actually CICD is working on that as well. And so it is something that has come up. It wasn't data that we asked for this study, but is definitely something, right, that for sure plays into the conversations as well. So appreciate you all bringing that up. Again, one of the more exciting things is, like Crystal mentioned, is this CICD work and looking at some of this sort of regression, right? So comparing data points across the board to each other, saying, does savings, dollar amount savings plus debt to income do something different than looking at just those two metrics alone? And so that's something, again, that we'll be really excited about delving into in more depth here as well. I think one final thing before I move on to consumer, there is a question about the borrower's compliance and reporting requirements. We really, for this study, we looked at everything up until loan closing and nothing passed. But it has come up as a significant conversation, right? Is to say, really, like, fine, we get someone to closing, that's really great and a huge accomplishment. But the ongoing hands-on relationship building and working with that client day to day after their loan closes is likely even more significant in terms of delinquency and repayment. And so something as a sort of future thought around data collection and looking at, other avenues of this research, that's something we're very interested in. And especially Sweetgrass, all we do is impact, right? And so looking at after a loan closes is something that's very interesting to us, especially, but I think overarchingly is the story of CDFIs. You don't just leave a loan client once they close a loan, right? And that's a huge point. So thank you for bringing that up in chat. All right, we'll continue to answer questions as we go as well, but I'll move here on to the last loan type that we looked at, which was consumer lending. In consumer, we see even less significant metrics, and then conversely, more not significant metrics. Our significant metrics here, actually, the two that are most interesting are the client engagement and training hours here. The interest rate and loan payment are things that we would expect to see differences among these, and they're not necessarily predictive, right? The interest rate and loan payment are determined by underwriting to a large degree, rather than before that happens and sort of helping you determine risk, but it is a result of your risk rating. So we did include all of those just to kind of see if there is anything really outlying in these situations. And while with consumer and with a couple of the other loan types as well, that these were different based on delinquent or not, it's something we would expect to see. Whereas client engagement and training hours are something that is a little bit more predictive in this conversation. So just to sort of mention that we would expect to see a higher interest rate with delinquent loans than we would see with not delinquent. That's something we would expect to see because you're going to be doing a higher interest rate potentially with folks who are more risky. So that's the idea there. The one that is interesting and that we heard some feedback on is the training hours, especially when thinking about coaching hours as well. So some of the interpretations we heard is that, we spend a ton of time one-on-one with the consumer client, working with them to understand their credit score and understand budgeting and saving and really doing that one-on-one work with that client. But it's not significant, right? We're not seeing that those number of hours really help us predict delinquency or not. Conversely, what we do see though is that the number of hours spent in a classroom training situation is significant. That the more time that they spend in a classroom setting, the more likely they are to repay. And so that was an interesting piece that sort of one-on-one time might more better be traded for classroom time as an example, and sort of a way to think about how you structure your one-on-one services and development services. Really overarchingly, that was something that came up with that. The other note though about consumer risk rating is that not a ton of folks are doing it, right? So that it's not a sort of formalized process as much as it is for business and home lending that we're looking at. Most folks are saying, yeah, these are small dollar loans. I mean, it's really not worth our time to go through and risk rate a small dollar loan in this way. And we know that typically we're doing it in order to kind of get them to a place that they're loan ready. We're doing debt consolidations, we're doing credit builders, things of that nature. It's a different type of goal that we're looking for here. And so the levels of folks even doing full on risk analysis is much lower with consumer, which also flows into the idea that we've really only got sort of two significant metrics that really play into looking at consumer lending. So there's some kind of interesting trends that kind of support, again, what Native CDFIs are already doing in the world of risk rating consumer loans. And I think that's the summary I had for that. Crystal or Kristen, anything else you'd like to mention before we move on to bigger lessons?
No, I think this one of all of them was maybe one of the most surprising ones for me, the level of not significant ones, right? Because I know from my experience doing consumer lending, right, like payroll deduction was a huge thing for us, right? Can we get them on payroll deduction? Is that going to matter? Like it's surprising, right, that our clients that are going to come in and bring us their money once a month in person are doing just as well as the folks that are set up on payroll deduction. So this one was really surprising to me, but I don't know, Kristen, did you have any thoughts too?
No, I guess originally the client engagement versus training hours surprised me a little bit because we'd always gone along with if you will meet with your coach, you're more likely and attend your meetings prior to loan closing, you're more likely to have a connection, be engaged, and your loan's going to be good. But the training hours, after looking at it, does make a lot of sense because we have a hard time getting clients in the door for trainings, especially for personal finance. People do not like to talk about personal finance. They don't want to let anyone know that they might not be perfect with their personal finance. So when you look at this, it makes sense because people that are willing to come into the door and you're kind of opening yourself out there to be like, yeah, I'm not perfect at this with other people that are in the training room is, it's good because then it shows that they're willing to be open and vulnerable, I guess, kind of. And then which makes them a stronger client for repayment in the end because they're a little more, may be more driven to make their payments.
Yeah, very good interpretation there for sure. Appreciate that. All right, so we'll move on here and I'll actually pass it back to Crystal here to kind of bring us into a little bit of so what does this mean? Where do we go with all of this really kind of detailed information and data?
Yeah, so I just think it's worth noting, right, that one of the things, that client engagement piece, that gut reaction that the loan officer had to the client, and sort of understanding of how invested the client was in that process, like that was a repetitive theme in all of the areas, right? We saw in various ways how the number of hours that a person was spending with a client, that mattered to overall delinquency. So I think it's really fascinating. I think it shows the power of your relationship-based lending models, that we're working in communities, and that those borrowers are just as likely to be successful with the financial mainstream as anywhere else in the country, assuming that those relationships are being built and supported and tended. And so I think it's worth like sort of shouting that, and continuing to hit that. So yeah, what do you, Kristen, is there anything that you wanted to hop in on here, sort of on the what does it mean front? What does it mean for you as a Native CDFI looking through these results?
Well, I guess for four bands, it just really affirms, what we've always kind of thought was right, and how we're underwriting. So it's good to not feel like we've been wrong all these years. But then also like it's very hard as a loan officer to do for that character piece and to go with your gut feeling on things, especially if you're people that are more experienced. You might have more loan officers that are more experienced. You tend to have like a quicker reaction to people. And I'll go back to like the equity piece here. Like as a loan officer, I've gone through, and there's people that come through that I'm just, character is really good, really, really good on this borrower. They don't have the equity. And then you really have to fight and educate your board and your loan committee mostly on like, why is it so important that this person get funding, based off of your gut feeling, but then also, all the other numbers that you have for rating this person out, and then why we don't want to let, this one piece of equity hold them back from receiving financing. So just like looking at that, and not so much the numbers. Like, I know it's really hard to quantify qualitative data, but try to do the best you can, and don't be afraid to always reach out and see what other Native CDFIs are doing, and really educating your loan committee on why you're rating people out, or credit score, or your credit rating and scoring out your loan client, so that they understand everything that's going into that. If that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Like that, it's so important to keep them on the same page as you, because they're the ones that are going to be approving your bigger business loans. So
mm-hmm. Definitely. One of the things that really stuck out to me looking at all of these underlying risk rating models for our Native CDFIs was just how holistic people considered the person, right? That there was so, right. So maybe a person did score lower in equity, right? Maybe, but there were these other sort of factors that people were considering in. They were seeing the whole person. They were seeing the relationships that they had in the community, and they were seeing the fact that they had gone to the effort of going to all the classes, and that was factored into sort of how they were evaluating. And so I think that is one of the differences in sort of the financial mainstream, is sort of the holistic nature of the underwriting, how it wraps around the whole person, and that there's very few things where it's just like, right, I remember the first time I applied for a home loan, right, and it was like, here are the three things that you have to meet before we'll even consider you, right? They're like, the credit score has to be this, and it has to be this, and there's power in that, and we always want to have fairness with our processes and have transparency, but I did it was powerful to see sort of the holistic nature, the way that you were able to consider the whole person through the underwriting process. And that's why we had so many underwriting criteria underneath everything, is because you were evaluating all of these different dimensions of personhood, and trying to quantify that fairly. And so that was really, really powerful to see.
For sure. I wanted to address another comment as Kristen kind of talked even more about the character score. I missed a comment earlier about if that was something that folks could share. And I think Forbands has made it pretty clear that they're happy to share their risk rating sheet that explains what, what sort of goes into character score and what the grading levels are, as well as that client engagement score as well. So something that I think we'll be talking about it more in the report as well, but it's something that I know that Forbands has talked about being willing to share out. So just a note there that definitely reach out to them if you're a little bit more interested and curious about that character and client engagement scoring as part of risk analysis. Awesome. We'll move on here to next steps as well. And, because we have the CVET platform here, and we'd love to hear your all's interpretations as you've been sharing them throughout here as well. But, continue as you're sort of thinking through and listening to us and talking about what it means and what some of the next steps are. We would love for you all to share any interpretations or ideas or questions continued that you have in the chat and comments there. But we'll move to this next steps slide. And we've talked about several of these to some degree as we were presenting, but these first two bullets are especially interesting to me as Sweetgrass being a data geek, right? That really thinking about strengthening existing data collection, right? That was one of the things that we definitely experienced going through this process, is saying some folks have really strong data on a handful of these metrics, but a lot of the groups that we talked to said, geez, it'd be really great to do this over again in a year or two. Right after we kind of have a better idea of some of the other things that folks are collecting and some of the things that we could add to our collection processes, that folks were really excited about potentially strengthening some of that existing data collection and contributing more to this conversation that kind of plays into improving future data collection as well, and kind of looking at this data in a different light. And so some of that is saying, a lot of these folks went sort of back in time and assigned sort of a character and client engagement score. So it wasn't something that they collected from the beginning. But a lot of folks are saying it'd be really great to collect this from the time of loan closing. And so that's something that folks were kind of doing lessons learned from some of the ways that we did this research, as well as the way that other CDFIs are risk rating. And so that's something that's really exciting, and I'm really interested to see in the coming years how we might be able to look into risk analysis in some different ways based on a strengthening of existing and future data collection for sure. Crystal, I'll pass it off there to you to talk about engagement and education stuff as well.
Yeah, so with the engagement, I think it's important to, highlight how the success of your underwriting and the strength of your underwriting practices with partners and funders, right? There's still, after all these years, still that perception of risk of lending in Native communities or in persistent poverty areas in general. And so I think this stands as a really great tool to do some education with potential partners and funders, potential investors around how that deep relationships with our communities, how that ultimately supports the lending process. I also know from my own experience that it's really hard to fundraise for those development services, for those coaching hours, for those training hours, right? It's hard to support those programs. And yet we just saw over and over and over again how that is part of the critical piece that makes you successful as lenders, right? And that we can't cut those services if we want to be successful lenders. And so, I think it's an important piece for us to just hold on to and share out. I also think, at OWISTA, we're hopeful that, we can use that for sharing as we do our training programs. We're going to be doing our loan officer training programs moving forward, our lending. We can bring some of these tools. We are so grateful to our partners that shared their data with us, right? That's huge. So thank you to every Native CDFI that was in there. That took a lot of time on their ends, right? To go through, to find all that data. Some of them had them in paper files. They were trying to get them in Excel tables, right? That takes a lot of work. And so they did that with a joyful heart because they believe in our industry and because they were curious of the results themselves. And so I want to thank them, but also know that we will be we will be personally be using that on our end to hopefully provide additional training and resources, both on the partners and funders sides, but also with loan officers and board members. And I know for bands, you have been using your data to do that work too.
Yeah, sorry, Crystal. Yeah, we have. It's been good. Yeah, and especially with educating the board, because a lot of times whenever you're in a small community, I feel that you might not necessarily get your board is made up of people in your community, and they're not experts on lending. They're not experts in the small business sometimes. So it's important to make sure that you can keep them educated, because that just makes your organization stronger.
Mm-hmm. And one of the other things that we've heard over and over again is that it'd be really interesting to enter this into a body of work with other CDFIs. Like, are Native CDFIs unique in this way, or is this part of the whole industry? And we have, of course, our partners for rural transformation that work also in persistent poverty areas that we can be sharing data with. We have other CDFIs that work many near you all, like MoFi works in similar target geographies, right? That we can potentially think about how can we compare this to other CDFIs, and how can we support the broader CDFI industry? How can they learn from the work that we've been doing as a Native CDFI industry around this? So it's a really unique opportunity for us, and we are so, once again, super grateful to the partners that supported us and were willing to share their valuable time to allow us to do this work.
Thank you all. I think we've got about 9 or so minutes left. I'd like to open it up for questions. I know that folks have been pretty good about posting throughout the conversations, but we'll kind of leave it open at this point to receive any questions that folks might have about the data, suggestions you have for next steps. We have some very good ones that you all already brought up as well, but would love to hear any sort of final thoughts and interpretations and or questions from the audience at this time. And there's a little bit of lag time, I know, because you all will kind of make comments on CVent and then it gets translated to us over here. So a little bit of patience as we wait for some comments to potentially come in here. Now, no, Chris, if you have other things to fill the space with while we wait for comments, if you'd like, or we can wait in silence as well.
I wish I did.
I'm sure folks wouldn't mind if we end a few minutes early for lunch as well if things don't come in.
Yeah, no one will have any issues.
Something to mention around some of the sort of exciting future work is that, we didn't include everyone, right, in this group. We didn't want to kind of ask every Native CDFI to be part of it, and just a lot of time and a lot of work. But to say that it's something that if you're, we did actually not only do this as a full report and sort of looked at all of the business lenders together, for example, but we did go through and look at individual CDFI level data as well, and you presented that back to the participating CDFIs. And it's certainly something that if folks feel like you have a good deal of the metrics and you want to understand risk with your organization better, it's something that we have a pretty good model set up to do at this point because of all this work. And so just say if you didn't participate but you're like, this is really cool, I'd love to see what this looks like with our organization, that's something that I think we'd be really excited to think about doing and work with folks to make that happen. Not a plug for services. Is something I would like to, just say that, like, just because you weren't in this round, right, that there's, I think there's still opportunity for folks to dig into this on their own as well, with some of the tools that were developed in this process. And some of that will be sort of available in the report, but it's something that, we'd love to hear from folks who are interested in kind of helping take this to the next level.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Andrea, is really valuable, because one of the things that did happen is we did see variation among different CDFIs. So there were, for example, this is across the entire field of those who submitted research, right? It was the sort of averages, right? But there were, for example, some of the criteria that were significant to 4 bands that weren't significant in the broader field, right? So it is really important. Like, I mean, please don't like completely overnight be like, okay, we're not gonna collect any of this data anymore. Like, it doesn't matter. Crystal and Andrea said so, because right, your own model is your own model, and it's really valuable to do that individual CDFI research as well, to sort of get a sense of what's important in your community and how your risk rating, what predicts delinquency in your own community too. So that's a little bit of a caveat around like of that. And also, but we do want to be able to tell a story as an industry. And so we hope that this sort of being able to look across the whole sector and whole field and look at those big themes was valuable to you.
Yeah, Crystal, very good point that I would like to hammer in addition, right? Like, don't go changing what you're doing based on this. It is preliminary, as I mentioned, with some of the limitations, right? We would definitely need to have a much larger sample, go back further in time. This does not include any loans closed during COVID either, right? And COVID has significantly impacted the way that especially the economy is working. And so just, yeah, definitely kind of take the lessons learned around that, finances matter, but maybe not as much as in mainstream lending, and that relationships are everything, but don't go changing your risk and the way that you collect data and underwrite loans, for sure. That would be a little scary to do off of the data that we have, but it is really interesting stuff, and we're really excited about some of the trends that it's showing and the support of the work that Native CDFIs are doing.
Awesome. And I'm not seeing any more questions come in, so I think we probably can close a few minutes early. Someone wrote a really nice comment. We're taught so much about the 5 C's of credit, and it is such a surprise that it doesn't account for everything when it comes to lending. I really love the data you've compiled. Heart back at you. Thank you. So really appreciate sort of the energy you all had. I could tell by the questions that there was a lot of genuine interest in this topic. That's really powerful. And also just want to kind of do some context setting. Do some context setting to let you know about the time frame for the rest of the day, which is to say we are going to go here soon on another half-hour break. And so we will be back at it at 1 o'clock Mountain for your breakout sessions. So we are really looking forward to that. Oh, and we had some new questions come in while I was talking. See, that's all you got to do. You just got to go to the wrap up and then the questions come in. I love it. So we'll take those too. And then we will have that nice half an hour break for you. But let's look at the new question that just came in. Okay, not for this report, but I'm curious if there is a conversation or risk more holistically and for whom. Not just the risk of making a loan for Native CDFI, but also the risk of not making a loan for the client and broader community. I love that. That's a powerful comment. I think that is part of, I would just say that, candidly, that is part of what we were sort of hoping to do by doing this broader research, is sort of highlight that the sort of importance of having an inclusive economy here with this report, and sort of highlight that risk too. And I know that I've heard many of you all over the course of this project say things like, I don't even like the word risk. The word risk doesn't even begin to describe it, right? Because it's already taking some implicit bias in that, right? So I love that question. And then we have another question. Have you come across any overlap, piggyback with any applications being used in fintech in order to enhance and curate relationships with individual customers? Andrew, do you have anything to hop in on any of these too?
Nothing. We haven't looked at anything specifically on that front. It's an interesting thing we can add to kind of thinking about next steps and, what we kind of do to look at that overlap. But it's not something we specifically looked at here. And I do think some of the context setting, Crystal, as you mentioned, around some of the, the risk of not making a loan to a client is something that I think we kind of talk about in some of that sort of justice work and access to credit and capital work, and that kind of sets the context for this research. So I think that you highlighted that a little bit with that first question as well. But yeah, we haven't looked at any of that sort of the applications in fintech at this point.
Okay. Well, we made it perfectly up to the course of the hour. So woohoo, that's so great, up to the top of the half hour. I want to thank Andrea and Kristen for riding shotgun with me here as we were having this great conversation, and for sort of the focus and interest that they had through getting through this entire research project, which was, a collaborative brainchild that was ultimately inspired by the amazing work that was happening at 4Bands around this area. And with that, we'll express our gratitude, and I hope that you can all get some lunch and stretch, and that we'll all enjoy coming back in a half an hour in order to join our breakout sessions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.